A millionaire visits his ex-wife's house to see his daughter and finds the 7-year-old crying while cleaning cockroaches in the basement. Her mother and stepfather watch TV, ignoring everything. What he does next shocks everyone. Before we embark on this story, let us know where you're tuning in from. Leave a comment below and enjoy the experience. Jack Remington was used to his life moving at a certain pace. He was a millionaire. His name had weight in boardrooms, and his decisions shaped companies. But at that very moment, as his car rolled down the familiar streets, everything in his life felt uncertain. It wasn't business or success that troubled him today. It was his daughter, Lily. He hadn't seen her in a while. Not in the way he wanted. Their conversations were reduced to polite phone calls, their bond a distant echo of the warmth it once held. Divorce had drained much from him, but seeing Lily's face that afternoon felt like a knot in his chest, an unspoken pain that had only grown over time. Jack pulled into the driveway of his ex-wife Claire's house. The place hadn't changed much. It still looked like the home they'd once shared, a place where laughter had filled the rooms before everything fell apart. He sat in the car for a moment, staring at the house. He hadn't planned this visit, but something inside him told him it was time. He walked up the porch steps, his mind racing. Would Claire be there? Would Lily be happy to see him? He knocked. The door opened, and there she was, Claire, looking the same with her warm yet guarded smile. The years had been kind to her, but Jack couldn't shake the bitterness that still lingered between them. "Jack," she said, her voice clipped. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see Lily," Jack replied, his voice steady, despite the unease that twisted his stomach. Claire hesitated for a moment, as if weighing something in her mind. "She's in the basement," Claire said finally, stepping aside to let him in. Jack nodded, but the unease in his chest grew stronger. He hadn't been inside this house in years. He descended the stairs into the basement, the air growing colder as he approached the dimly lit space. And there she was, Lily. 7 years old, hunched over, tears running down her face as she scrunched up paper towels, wiping away cockroaches that scuttled across the floor. His heart stopped. The sight of his daughter, so small, so innocent, reduced to cleaning pests from the floor, it shattered him. "Lily?" Jack's voice cracked as he called her name. She looked up, startled, her face streaked with tears. She stood up quickly, wiping her hands on her dress, but the damage had already been done. "Why are you doing this?" Jack asked, his voice trembling with emotion. Lily didn't respond, she just shook her head, a silent plea in her eyes for him to make sense of it all. Jack's heart ached. He turned back toward the stairs, his gaze fixed on the door to the living room, where Claire and her new husband, Alex, were oblivious to their daughter's distress. "Claire!" Jack shouted, storming back upstairs. "How could you let her do this?" "What kind of parent are you?" Claire and Alex were sitting on the couch watching TV, as if nothing in the world mattered. Jack's anger flared. "She's cleaning cockroaches in the basement. Why aren't you doing anything?" Claire barely glanced up from the screen. "She's fine," she muttered, as if brushing off a minor inconvenience. "No, she's not fine. This isn't normal." Alex, sitting quietly, finally spoke up. "Maybe you should just leave, Jack. You're overreacting." Jack's fists clenched. He didn't care about Alex's opinion right now. All he could focus on was Lily, his little girl, suffering in silence. His mind raced. He couldn't leave her here. He wouldn't. "I'm taking her," Jack declared. "I'm taking her right now." Claire shot to her feet, her face flushed with anger. "You can't do that." "I can," Jack said firmly. "I'm her father, and I'm getting her out of here." He turned on his heels, heading back toward the basement, determined to get Lily away from this place. He would do whatever it took. Jack felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. As he reached the stairs, Claire's voice stopped him. "You can't just take her like that. It's illegal, Jack." But Jack was done listening. "She's my daughter, and no one, not even you, is going to keep me from protecting her." The tension in the air was thick. But Jack knew what he had to do. He grabbed Lily's hand, pulling her gently but firmly toward the door. She didn't resist, her small fingers gripping his as they stepped out of the house. He could hear Claire's voice shouting behind them, but it didn't matter. Jack wasn't looking back. He was going to protect his daughter, no matter the cost. As they reached the car, Jack paused for a moment, looking at Lily's tear-streaked face. "We're going to be okay, sweetie," he whispered. "I promise." He drove off, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on his chest. He didn't know how things would unfold from here, but one thing was certain. Nothing in his life would ever be the same again. And the truth was, neither would Lily's. The drive from Claire's house was silent, save for the occasional sniffle from Lily in the back seat. Jack kept his eyes on the road, his mind reeling. What had he just done? He had taken his daughter without permission. His heart raced as the consequences of his impulsive decision weighed on him. Was this the right thing to do? He had always been a man who prided himself on making calculated moves, thinking 3 steps ahead in every situation. But today, everything had felt different. His heart had taken over, and now he was dealing with the aftermath. "Lily," he said softly, trying to keep his voice steady. "Are you okay?" Lily didn't answer right away. She was staring out the window, the soft glow of the streetlights illuminating her face, which still carried traces of fear and confusion. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Jack continued. "I should have come sooner. I should have done more. But I promise things will be different now." Lily finally turned to look at him, her eyes wide and uncertain. "Where are we going, Daddy?" Jack's throat tightened. He hadn't thought about what would come next. He didn't have a plan. He had acted on instinct. "We're going to my place," Jack said, his voice firm yet soothing. "You're going to stay with me, all right?" Lily nodded slowly, though she still didn't seem entirely convinced. Jack's stomach twisted as he realized that his daughter was just as lost as he was. She hadn't asked for any of this. None of it was her fault. And yet here she was, being dragged into the middle of a war he wasn't prepared to fight. When they arrived at Jack's apartment, the city lights were just beginning to flicker on in the distance. The building was high, sleek, and modern, a sharp contrast to the cozy suburban home Claire had kept. As Jack parked the car, he looked at Lily in the rearview mirror. Her face was a mixture of confusion and exhaustion. She hadn't had a good night's sleep in who knew how long, and now she was thrust into an unfamiliar place, with no explanation of what had just happened. "We'll get you settled in," Jack said, trying to sound reassuring. He didn't feel reassuring. He felt terrified of the mess he'd just created. They took the elevator up to his apartment, and as they walked inside, Jack couldn't help but notice how cold and impersonal it felt. He'd spent so much time building his empire, acquiring wealth, that he had neglected to make his home feel like one. He hadn't exactly been the world's greatest father before, but now things had to change. They had to change. "I'll get you some food," Jack said, his mind whirling. "You must be hungry." Lily didn't respond. She just stared at him, her face a picture of uncertainty, as she stood in the middle of his minimalist living room. Jack moved around, fumbling through the kitchen, grabbing snacks he knew Lily liked, chips, crackers, something easy. But the weight of the situation pressed on him like a vice, suffocating him. He was doing this for Lily, but he wasn't sure if he was doing it right. As he set a plate down in front of her, he noticed she was still staring at the floor, her small hands clasped tightly together. "I know this is all strange," Jack said, sitting down beside her. "But you're safe now, okay? Nobody will hurt you. I won't let them." Lily looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "Why did you take me from Mommy?" The question hit Jack like a ton of bricks. He swallowed hard, fighting the lump in his throat. "Lily, I'm sorry," he said, his voice softer now. "I wasn't going to leave you there, not like that. I don't know what's going on at your mom's house, but I do know this. You shouldn't be cleaning bugs. You deserve better than that." Lily didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at him, as if waiting for something. Jack rubbed his forehead, trying to find the right words. But there were no right words. He had taken her from her mother. He had crossed a line. And now he had to live with it. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his heart sinking when he saw Claire's name on the screen. "I should probably take this," Jack said quietly, standing up. He walked to the other room, his mind racing. He knew what this call was going to be about. She was going to be furious. He hit the answer button, bracing himself for the inevitable storm. "Jack!" Claire's voice was sharp, full of anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing? You can't just take Lily like that." "I had to," Jack said, his voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside him. "You're not taking care of her, Claire. She's cleaning cockroaches in the basement while you and Alex sit there doing nothing." "Don't you dare accuse me of being a bad mother," Claire shot back. "You don't know what goes on in my house. You don't know anything." "I know enough," Jack replied, his voice rising. "And I'm not going to stand by and let you neglect her. I'm taking her now. I'll fight you in court if I have to." There was a long pause on the other end. Jack could hear Claire breathing heavily. But she didn't speak. "You can't just do this, Jack," she finally said, her voice quieter now. "You're making this worse for everyone." Jack clenched his jaw, his emotions tangled. "I'm doing what's best for her. Don't try to twist this into something it's not." "Whatever," Claire spat. "I'll see you in court." The line went dead. Jack stood there, the weight of the conversation sinking in. He had made a choice. Now the fight was just beginning. When he walked back into the living room, Lily was still sitting where he had left her. She looked up at him with those wide, searching eyes. "Will Mommy be mad at me?" she asked softly. Jack sat down beside her, pulling her into his arms. "I'm not going to let anyone hurt you, sweetie. Not anymore." But deep down, Jack knew this was just the beginning. What he had started by taking Lily away from her mother would set off a chain of events that neither of them could escape. And in the end, Jack wasn't sure if he would be able to protect her from everything that was coming. The next few days passed in a haze for Jack. Lily had settled into his apartment, though the silence between them often felt overwhelming. He had tried to reassure her, tried to make her feel safe, but the truth was, he didn't know how to fix things. He didn't know if he could. Claire hadn't tried to contact him again. That left Jack with a sinking feeling of dread, knowing that she was likely preparing for a legal battle. The weight of the impending court fight loomed over him. But what terrified him most was the thought of losing Lily. Losing her to a mother who had, in his eyes, neglected her. He knew he had acted impulsively when he took her, but every instinct he had told him it was the right thing to do. One evening, as Jack was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to sort through some work, the doorbell rang. His stomach dropped. He knew who it was. When he opened the door, there she stood, Claire. Her face was a storm of anger and hurt, her eyes sharp with fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Jack?" Claire's voice was low but full of venom. "You don't just come into my house and take our daughter. You had no right." Jack stepped back, allowing her inside. "I had every right, Claire," he said calmly, though his voice shook slightly. "I'm her father and you're not taking care of her. I saw it with my own eyes. You're letting her clean cockroaches in the basement while you and Alex watch TV. What kind of mother does that?" Claire's jaw clenched. She looked like she was about to say something, but instead she took a breath and exhaled slowly, as if trying to regain control of herself. "I don't need you to come in here and judge me," Claire spat, her voice rising again. "You don't know what it's like for me. You don't understand anything." Jack felt his anger flare, but he fought to keep his voice steady. "I understand more than you think, Claire. I understand that my daughter is suffering, and I can't stand by and let it happen." Lily had been sitting quietly on the couch, her small figure curled into a ball, watching her parents with wide, worried eyes. Jack's gaze flickered to her, and his heart clenched at the sight of her. She had been through too much already. "I didn't want to do this, Claire," Jack continued, his voice softening but still firm. "But I'm not going to let you keep hurting her. I'm taking full custody." Claire's eyes widened, her anger giving way to something else. Fear. "You can't do that. You know as well as I do that I have every right to her, Jack. I'm her mother. This is illegal." Jack's heart raced. He knew that. He had taken Lily without going through the proper channels. He hadn't thought about the consequences. But now, standing face to face with Claire, he didn't care. He was prepared to fight for his daughter no matter what it took. "I don't care," Jack said, his voice low. "I'm not letting her go back to that house, Claire. Not after what I saw. Not after what you've allowed to happen." Claire's eyes flickered with something, guilt. Maybe. Or regret. For a moment she looked like she might break, but then the walls came back up. "You don't get to tell me how to raise our daughter, Jack. You gave up your right to have a say when you walked out on us. You left me to do everything alone." The words hit Jack like a punch to the gut. He had walked out. He had failed them both, but this wasn't about the past. It was about now. It was about Lily. "Don't put this on me," Jack replied, his voice breaking. "I left because I thought you were strong enough to handle it. But you weren't. You're not." Claire's face twisted in anger, and for a moment, Jack thought she might lash out, but she didn't. Instead, she just stood there, her fists clenched by her sides. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" Claire whispered harshly. "You think because you have money and success and whatever else it is that you think you can come in here and fix everything. But you can't. You have no idea what I've been through. You have no idea what it's like to be the only one there for her." Jack felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly replaced by the certainty that he was right. He had made the choice to take Lily because he believed it was the only way to protect her. "I don't think I'm better than you, Claire," Jack said softly. "But I'm here now, and I'm not going to let you put her in danger. Not again." Lily had come up behind them, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Mommy, I don't want to go back." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Claire turned toward her daughter, her eyes filled with pain. But there was nothing she could say. Not now. Jack's heart ached for Lily. He could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear he had seen the night he took her away. He couldn't undo what had been done, but he could make sure Lily never had to face that fear again. "This isn't about you and me, Claire," Jack said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "It's about Lily, and I'm not letting her go back to a place where she's scared and neglected. Not ever." Claire's face paled, her lips trembling as she fought to hold back tears. "You think I'm a bad mother, don't you?" she whispered. Jack's chest tightened. "I think you're struggling, but I also think I can do better for her. I'm not giving up on her." Claire stepped back, her eyes filled with anger, but also something deeper. Sadness, regret. She didn't say anything more, just turned and walked out the door, leaving Jack and Lily standing in the aftermath of their confrontation. Jack closed the door slowly, his mind racing with everything that had just happened. He knew it wasn't over. The fight was just beginning. But as he looked down at Lily, standing beside him, he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't back down. He was going to protect his daughter, no matter the cost. And if Claire wanted a battle, Jack was ready to fight. The sun had barely risen when Jack made his decision. The previous night's confrontation with Claire had shaken him to his core, but it also solidified something he had been quietly struggling with for days. He couldn't just sit back and wait for the court to decide what happened to Lily. He couldn't risk her going back into that environment, not when he had seen firsthand what was happening. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, but Jack ignored it. The notifications could wait. He sat across from Lily at the kitchen table, watching her play with her cereal, her small hands moving absent-mindedly over the spoon. She had been so quiet since Claire's visit. Jack didn't know if she was scared or if she was just processing everything in her own way, but he could see the shadow in her eyes. "Lily," Jack began softly, his voice cracking a little as he tried to keep his composure. "We're going to have to leave, all right? We can't stay here much longer." Lily looked up at him, her blue eyes wide and uncertain. "Leave? Where are we going, Daddy?" Jack smiled faintly, trying to reassure her. "We're going to go somewhere safer, somewhere you can be happy, okay?" Lily nodded slowly, but didn't say anything else. Jack could see the fear lingering beneath the surface. She had already been through too much. He stood up and walked to the window, glancing outside at the quiet suburban street. The decision he was about to make would change everything. There was no going back. He had already broken the law by taking Lily without legal consent. But in his mind, he had no other choice. He had to protect her. He grabbed his car keys from the counter and turned back to Lily. "Get your things, sweetie. We're leaving now." Lily hesitated, her small voice barely a whisper. "What about Mommy?" Jack's heart clenched. He knew the answer, but he didn't want to say it aloud. "We're going to be okay, I promise." Lily scrambled to gather her things, her movements frantic, as if she too understood the gravity of the situation. Jack quickly packed a bag for her, throwing in clothes, a few toys, and anything that might comfort her. He couldn't risk taking too much. He couldn't risk leaving any trace of where they were going. Once everything was ready, Jack led Lily to the door. His mind raced with 1,000 possibilities, each one darker than the last. If Claire reported them, he'd be branded as a kidnapper. If he didn't get out of town fast enough, the police could show up at his door. But there was no more room for indecision. There was only one thing that mattered: keeping Lily safe. As they drove away from his apartment, Jack didn't look back. The thought of Claire showing up, furious and desperate, crossed his mind. But he had to shut it out. He couldn't afford to think about the consequences right now. His only focus was getting Lily to a place where she could be safe, where she could start to heal. Hours later, Jack found himself in a small, out-of-the-way town. The drive had been long, and his hands were trembling as he parked the car in front of a modest house. It wasn't much, but it was far enough from the city that no one would think to look for them here. They stepped inside, and Lily immediately ran to the couch, curling up and hugging a stuffed animal close to her chest. Jack stood in the doorway, his mind spinning with everything that had just happened. He had taken Lily without any legal grounds, without the court's approval, and now they were living in a place where no one knew them. The weight of the decision hung over him. He knew he had done what he thought was right, but as the silence stretched on, doubt began to creep in. Was this really the best thing for Lily? Was he doing the right thing? Or was he just letting his emotions get the best of him? The phone buzzed again, and Jack glanced at it. This time he couldn't ignore it. It was from his lawyer. Jack took a deep breath and answered. "Hello? Jack, we need to talk. Claire's already made a move. She's contacting the authorities. You need to bring Lily back before this goes too far." Jack's heart pounded. I can't take her back to that house. You don't understand what's going on there." "I understand," the lawyer said, his voice strained. "But this could escalate quickly, Jack. You've broken the law. If you don't bring her back, you're risking everything." Jack swallowed hard. He could hear the fear in his lawyer's voice. But it didn't change the reality of the situation. He couldn't go back. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. "I'm not taking her back," Jack said firmly. "I'll deal with the consequences later, but I'm keeping her safe." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before the lawyer spoke again. "You're playing a dangerous game, Jack. But if you're going to do this, you need to be prepared for what's coming next." The line went dead, and Jack felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. He had made his choice, and now there was no turning back. He sat down next to Lily, who had fallen asleep on the couch. He brushed a lock of hair from her face, watching her sleep peacefully. She had no idea what was happening, and Jack wanted to keep it that way. He wanted to shield her from all the ugliness of the world, but he knew that wouldn't last long. In the days that followed, the reality of what Jack had done began to sink in. He had taken Lily, and now he was facing the consequences. The phone calls from his lawyer became more frequent, but Jack refused to listen. He couldn't go back. Not after everything that had happened. But as the days passed, Jack began to realize that the fight he had started wasn't just about custody. It was about something deeper, about proving to himself that he could be the father Lily needed. He had spent so many years running from his responsibilities, running from the pain of his past, and now, for the first time in a long time, he was standing up for something that truly mattered. The battle was far from over. But Jack knew one thing for sure. He would never give up on his daughter. Jack sat in the quiet of his new home, the phone in his hand like a foreign object, a reminder of everything that was spiraling out of control. The house was small and had a cozy, humble charm to it, but it felt cold. The walls, the rooms, They were all empty in ways he hadn't realized until now. He had broken the rules. He had taken his daughter, and there was no going back. Lily was asleep, tucked into a small bed in the room down the hall. Jack had tried to make her feel at home, but there was only so much he could do. She was still processing everything. The change of scenery, the hurried flight from the life they once knew. It was all too much. The fear in her eyes never left her. Jack hadn't told her about the storm that was brewing outside. He didn't want her to know the trouble they were in. He didn't want her to know that Claire had already contacted the authorities, telling them Jack had kidnapped Lily. He didn't want her to feel the weight of what was about to unfold. The first knock on the door came around noon the next day. Jack froze, his hand still holding the mug of coffee he had barely touched. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment time seemed to slow. He had known this was coming. He had known there would be consequences, but he wasn't prepared for this. Not yet. He walked to the door, took a deep breath, and opened it. A sheriff stood on the doorstep, his uniform crisp and his expression unreadable. Jack's stomach dropped. He had expected this. But now that it was happening, he felt a sick sense of dread crawl up his spine. "Mr. Jack Lewis?" the sheriff asked. Jack nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "That's me." "We have a warrant for your arrest," the sheriff said, his voice cold. "You're being charged with child abduction. You need to come with us." For a moment, Jack couldn't breathe. His mind raced, but all he could think about was Lily, asleep in the room just a few feet away. She was innocent in all of this. She didn't deserve any of it. And now, her world was about to shatter once again. "I'm not going anywhere," Jack said, his voice shaking but firm. "I'm not going to let you take her." The sheriff's expression didn't change, but Jack could see the tension in his shoulders. "Mr. Lewis, this doesn't have to escalate. You need to let us handle this." But Jack wasn't listening. All he could think about was Lily. He had promised her she would be safe. He couldn't let them take her away. "I'm not going to let you take her," Jack repeated, his voice stronger now, almost desperate. The sheriff took a step forward, his hand hovering near his belt. "We don't want to make this difficult, sir. But you're not going to stop this." Jack swallowed hard. The walls felt like they were closing in on him. He was out of options, out of time. The legal system was coming for him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Then, just as the sheriff was about to take another step, Jack heard a sound behind him. A soft, almost imperceptible thump from the hallway. Lily. Her small face appeared in the doorway. Her eyes wide, her hair tangled from sleep. Jack's heart twisted when he saw her. She was just a child, caught in a situation she didn't understand. She looked at him, waiting for him to tell her everything would be okay. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack's stomach dropped. He looked back at the sheriff, and then, without thinking, he moved toward Lily. He crouched down in front of her, trying to mask his fear. "Sweetheart, you need to go back to your room," Jack said, his voice as gentle as he could make it. "Just for a minute, okay? I'll be right there." But Lily didn't move. She stepped forward, taking Jack's hand with a quiet, trembling grip. "Where are we going, Daddy?" Jack's heart shattered at the sight of her, so small, so vulnerable. How could he tell her what was happening? How could he explain that everything was falling apart? The sheriff sighed, his patience running thin. "Mr. Lewis, if you don't comply, we will have no choice but to arrest you on the spot. Please don't make this harder than it already is." Jack closed his eyes for a brief moment, fighting the rush of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. This was it. This was the moment where everything either fell apart or started to fall into place. He could feel Lily's tiny hand gripping his, and in that moment, he knew. He couldn't back down now. Not when she was watching. Not when she was trusting him. With a deep breath, Jack stood up, turning to face the sheriff. He didn't know what was coming next. He didn't know if there was a way out. But he couldn't let them take Lily from him. He couldn't lose her, not again. "I'm not going anywhere," Jack said again, his voice steady this time. No longer a question, but a declaration. The sheriff seemed to consider this for a moment, and then he nodded. "Fine," he said coldly. But know this isn't over. You'll have to answer for this." As the sheriff turned and walked away, Jack felt the weight of what he had just done. The consequences were far from over. They were just beginning. But as he looked down at Lily, clutching his hand, Jack made a silent vow. No matter what it took, he would protect her. He had promised her that she would be safe, and he wasn't going to break that promise. Not now, not ever. The storm had only just begun, and the fight for Lily's future was far from over. Jack had no idea what would happen next, but one thing was certain. He was going to face whatever came with everything he had. The days that followed the sheriff's visit felt like an endless blur. The air in Jack's small apartment was heavy, thick with tension and the echo of unanswered questions. Every time he heard the rustling of papers or the ring of his phone, his stomach dropped. He was in a fight he hadn't fully prepared for. And it was a fight he knew would determine the future of his daughter. Lily, bless her, was holding up better than he expected. She clung to him, of course. She was frightened and confused, but the bond they shared gave her a sense of security that Jack wasn't sure he deserved. He'd never been a perfect father, but right now, he would be anything she needed him to be. It wasn't until the following week that the first letter came. A thick, official-looking envelope with Claire's name on it. Jack had been dreading this moment for days, but now that it was here, he couldn't bring himself to open it. Instead, he sat down at the kitchen table, Lily's drawings scattered across the surface, and stared at the envelope for what felt like an eternity. The clock ticked on the wall behind him, but all he could hear was the sound of his own thoughts, the sound of his life spiraling out of control. He didn't open the letter at first. He couldn't. It was too much to face. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he took a deep breath and ripped the envelope open. The letter inside was from Claire's lawyer. It was a request, no, a demand, for immediate custody of Lily. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he read the words, each one feeling like a slap to his face. The message was clear. Claire was going to fight for Lily. She wasn't going to let him get away with taking her. Jack's hands shook as he put the letter down. He had known it was coming, of course. He had known that Claire would never back down, but seeing it in writing, seeing the cold, clinical language of the law, made it real in a way he hadn't anticipated. This wasn't just about what was best for Lily anymore. It was about the legal system, about rights, about who could make the better case for being her parent. As much as Jack hated it, he knew that now he had to play by their rules. He had to go to court. He had to fight. The weight of it all hit him like a wave. He thought of the life he had built, the world he had created for Lily, and the wreckage he had left behind. Claire was a powerful woman. She had resources, connections, and the backing of the law on her side. What did he have? A small apartment and a desperate desire to protect his daughter. But that desperation was enough. That love for Lily was enough to drive him forward. He called the only lawyer he could afford, Mark Reynolds, a family attorney with a reputation for being competent, but not particularly well known. Jack knew that Mark wasn't going to be able to fight Claire's team on equal footing, but he had no choice. He needed someone to fight for him, someone who believed that what he was doing was right. Mark's office was small and a little run down, the kind of place where the carpet was frayed and the lights flickered overhead. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a far cry from the cold, sterile offices of Claire's legal team. Jack had to remind himself that this wasn't a contest of who had the better office or the nicer suit. It was a contest of who would be there for Lily. Jack sat across from Mark, his hands gripping the edge of the chair. Lily's face flashed in his mind, her small frame curled up on the couch, still afraid of what was happening. He thought of Claire, the cold look in her eyes when she realized she had lost control. He could feel the pressure mounting, suffocating him with each passing minute. "Mr. Lewis," Mark began, breaking the silence, "I know this situation is difficult, and I won't lie to you, it's going to be a fight. But I'll do everything I can to represent you. I believe you're doing what's best for your daughter." Jack nodded, though it felt like the weight of his own decision was crushing him. "I'm scared, Mark. I don't know if I can win this, but I can't let her go back to that house. I can't." Mark nodded. I understand. We'll make sure that the court knows what's best for her. But be prepared. There will be emotional moments. Claire will pull out all the stops to try and paint you as unfit. You have to stay strong." The words felt like a warning, but Jack didn't need it. He already knew what he was up against. Claire wasn't going to play fair. She never had. But he wasn't about to back down. The court date was set for 3 weeks from now. Jack felt as though that time would stretch on forever. Every day he worried about Lily, about what would happen to her if he lost. He had no idea what Claire would do, how far she would go. She had the money to make things ugly, and Jack had nothing. The first few days after the meeting with Mark were a blur of paperwork, legal jargon, and sleepless nights. Jack spent hours at the kitchen table, going through the papers, signing forms, and mentally preparing for what lay ahead. He called Lily's school to explain the situation, made arrangements for a temporary guardian if things went sideways. But none of it felt like enough. One evening, as he was sitting in the living room, reviewing some court documents, Lily appeared in the doorway. She was holding her favorite stuffed bear, the one Jack had bought for her on her last birthday. Her eyes were wide, and her expression was uncertain. "Daddy?" she asked softly. "Is everything going to be okay?" Jack felt his heart break at the sight of her. He wasn't sure if he could promise her everything would be okay, but he had to try. For her sake. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said, his voice rough. "Everything's going to be okay." But even as he said the words, he knew they were a lie. The next few days were filled with preparation, preparing Lily, preparing himself, preparing for a war he never thought he'd have to fight. And as the days dragged on, Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of what was coming. The battle had only just begun. Jack hadn't expected this to be easy. He hadn't expected it to be anything other than a fight. A brutal, ugly war for the most important thing in his life. Lily. But what he hadn't anticipated was the emotional toll this battle would take on him. The longer the legal proceedings stretched on, the more he found himself questioning not just his choices, but his entire life. At night, when the courtroom drama was over, when Mark called with updates or news of the next motion being filed, Jack was left alone in the quiet of his apartment. He would sit in the dark, thinking of Lily, wondering what she thought about it all. She was just 7 years old, too young to understand the intricacies of custody battles, too young to know why her father was fighting so hard to keep her. But there were moments, small moments, that made Jack see just how much she was struggling with it all. One night after dinner, Lily asked him in her quiet voice, "Daddy, is Mommy going to be mad at me for staying with you?" Jack's heart squeezed. It was the first time she had mentioned Claire since she'd been living with him. Jack thought of the bruising words Claire had used in court, the way she had painted Jack as the unstable one, the one who had no place raising their daughter. It was clear to him now that Lily had overheard something, picked up on something. "Sweetheart," Jack said softly, kneeling in front of her, "this isn't your fault. Mommy is going to be mad because she loves you, but you're not doing anything wrong. You're safe here with me." Lily looked up at him, her face scrunched in confusion. "But Mommy said I couldn't live here forever." Jack brushed a strand of hair out of her face and smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll figure it out, okay? Just like we've figured everything else out. You're my girl, and no one is going to take you from me." Lily didn't seem convinced, but she nodded, accepting his words without fully understanding them. And Jack hated himself for it. He hated that he couldn't make her understand how much he loved her, how far he would go to protect her. He hated that she had to grow up in the middle of this mess. A mess that wasn't of her making. The weight of it all pressed on him. He could feel it suffocating him in every quiet moment. He wanted to be strong for Lily. But the truth was, he didn't feel strong. He felt tired. Every day felt like a battle, not just with Claire, but with himself. He had never been a particularly emotional man. He had built his life around logic, around control. But now it was different. Now everything he thought he knew about himself was being called into question. He found himself wondering, was he doing the right thing? Was fighting for Lily's custody really the best decision, or was he just holding on to something he couldn't keep? He loved her. God, how he loved her. But did that love mean he could give her the life she deserved? At work, Jack couldn't focus. He found himself staring at his computer screen, unable to concentrate. His clients noticed too. He would lose track of calls, miss appointments, and forget things he never would have before. His employees grew concerned, but Jack barely had the energy to care. All he could think about was Lily, her future, their future. Mark's calls had become less frequent, but each time they spoke, the reality of what was happening hit harder. The custody battle was dragging on, and it seemed Claire was growing more determined with every passing day. She had hired a new lawyer, a ruthless woman named Veronica Roberts, known for her cutthroat tactics in family law. Jack didn't know how much more of this he could take. It was on one of those sleepless nights that Jack found himself staring at a photo of Lily. He had taken it just a few weeks ago. On a Sunday afternoon, when they had gone to the park together. She had been laughing as they chased each other around, her golden curls bouncing in the sunlight. She had looked so happy, so free. It was a memory Jack clung to now, one of the few moments of peace he had since the world seemed to implode. He looked at the photo again, tears stinging his eyes. What if it all went wrong? What if he lost her? His phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Mark. "Jack," Mark said, his voice grim. "We need to talk." Jack's heart skipped. "What's going on?" "I've spoken to Veronica Roberts. She's filing for an emergency hearing. Claire wants to have Lily placed back in her custody immediately." The words hit Jack like a punch. "What? How? That's not fair. We've only been through one hearing." "I know," Mark said, his voice soft with sympathy. "But Claire's lawyer is going to argue that Lily is in a state of emotional distress, and that your living situation is unstable for her. They're going to make a case that she should go back to Claire's house." Jack could barely breathe. "That's insane. I'm her father. I know," Mark cut in, "but we have to prepare. The hearing is in 2 days." The line went silent for a moment. Jack could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He had thought the battle was hard before. He hadn't realized what was about to come. The day of the hearing loomed closer, and Jack could feel the pressure building, like a weight pressing down on his chest. He had spent the past few days going over everything, reading through legal documents, consulting with Mark. But despite all his preparation, the uncertainty gnawed at him. Was he enough? Was he doing the right thing? Or was he pushing too hard? He knew what the stakes were. Losing Lily wasn't just a legal defeat. It would be the end of everything he had worked for in the last 7 years. His whole life had been consumed by this little girl, this miracle that had entered his world and turned everything upside down. He didn't know who he was without her, and the idea of her not being a part of his life, of her being with Claire again, was unbearable. Jack tried to push those thoughts aside as he sat at the kitchen table, flipping through some papers, trying to focus. Lily was at school, but her absence was just as deafening as her presence. The silence in the apartment felt suffocating. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He had never imagined that fatherhood would come with such pain. Sure, he had known there would be challenges. But this was beyond anything he had expected. The emotional toll it had taken on him in such a short amount of time was draining. His work was slipping, his energy was fading, and his thoughts were consumed by a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. Lily's laughter, once so easy and abundant, had become more muted lately. She had always been a happy child, full of light and joy, but Jack noticed the change in her over the past few weeks. She seemed quieter. She wasn't as playful as before, and when she did smile, it didn't reach her eyes the way it once did. The stress of the custody battle was beginning to show. It was taking its toll on both of them. He remembered a moment from a few days ago, a memory that now haunted him. He had been working late at his desk when Lily came into his office, holding something in her hand. "Daddy," she said softly, "I made this for you." Jack had looked up from his computer, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "What is it, sweetheart?" Lily held up a drawing, a picture of two people holding hands. It was simple, drawn in crayon, but it was clear who they were supposed to be, Jack and Lily. She had drawn them standing together under a bright sun, surrounded by flowers. "I want us to stay together," she said. Her voice barely a whisper. Jack's heart had shattered right there. The tears had come, but he didn't let her see. He couldn't. "Of course, sweetheart," he had said, choking back emotion. "We're always going to be together. Always." But even as the words left his mouth, Jack wasn't sure he could keep that promise. How could he? Now, as the hearing approached, Jack found himself reflecting on that moment more than anything. It wasn't just a simple drawing to Lily. It was a cry for stability, for security. She was scared, and she didn't even fully understand why. But Jack did, and he hated himself for not being able to protect her from the hurt. At the hearing, the day was a blur of cold rooms, legal jargon, and tense faces. Jack could barely focus on the arguments being made. He was too caught up in his own emotions, in the fear of losing Lily. His mind kept flashing back to the drawing, to the quiet desperation in her voice. Claire, dressed in a professional suit, sat across from him with her lawyer, Veronica Roberts. Jack tried to keep his eyes off her. He didn't want to think about the woman who had once been his wife, who had shared their hopes and dreams for the future. He had loved her once deeply, but now she was a stranger to him. Veronica was speaking now, her voice calm and controlled. "Your Honor, as much as Mr. Weston may wish to present himself as the better parent, the fact remains that he has made an impulsive decision to take his daughter away from her stable home. Lily's emotional well-being is at stake here, and we believe that placing her back in her mother's care would provide the consistency and security she needs." The words cut through Jack like a knife. His lawyer, Mark, leaned over to him, whispering, "Stay calm, let me handle this." But Jack could feel the heat rising in his chest. He wanted to shout, to scream. This was his daughter they were talking about. How could they paint him as the villain? Didn't they see how much he loved her? When it was Jack's turn to speak, he stood up slowly, trying to steady his breathing. He looked across the room at the judge, but his eyes kept drifting to Lily's empty chair next to him. She wasn't there, of course. But in that moment, it felt like she was. "Your Honor," Jack began, his voice surprisingly steady. "I know I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes in my life. But I love my daughter more than anything in this world, and I will do anything to protect her. Claire and I may not see eye to eye on a lot of things, but I am asking you, please, to consider what is best for Lily." He paused, trying to gather his thoughts, but all he could see was that drawing, the little picture of him and Lily together. "I may not have a perfect home, but it's a safe one. I'm doing the best I can, Your Honor. And if it means fighting for my daughter every step of the way, then that's what I'll do. I'm her father, and no one, not even her mother, has the right to take her from me." Jack felt his heart race, his words hanging in the air. For the first time since this all started, he felt like he had said the truth out loud. He wasn't just fighting for custody. He was fighting for his daughter's future, for her happiness. The judge didn't speak immediately, but Jack could see the skepticism in her eyes. Claire's lawyer, Veronica, had made a strong case. Would it be enough to sway the court? Jack sat in his apartment later that evening, his head in his hands. The hearing had been draining. He had given everything he had to his defense, but deep down, he knew that the outcome was uncertain. Veronica Roberts had been relentless. Claire had barely spoken. Her face a mask of indifference, but Jack could feel the silent accusation in her gaze. The legal battle had shifted. He wasn't just fighting for Lily anymore. He was fighting for his very identity as a father. He hadn't even realized how late it had gotten until he heard the knock on the door. He didn't expect anyone. The only visitors these days were Mark with legal updates, and the occasional delivery of food. Jack rose slowly, his body aching from the tension of the past few weeks. When he opened the door, he froze. It was Claire. She stood there in front of him, her arms crossed, a reluctant expression on her face. Jack's first instinct was to slam the door shut, to avoid another confrontation that would only lead to more hurt. but he hesitated, his breath caught in his throat. "What are you doing here?" Jack's voice was sharp, though a part of him felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could talk. Claire's eyes softened, but only for a moment. I wanted to see Lily." Jack's heart dropped. This was unexpected, too soon, too much. They hadn't spoken properly in weeks, not since the hearing. The last time she'd seen Lily had been at the first court-appointed meeting, which had been brief and awkward. "She's with her tutor," Jack replied curtly, stepping aside to let her in. "If you want to stay, you'll have to wait." Claire hesitated, her gaze drifting past Jack into the quiet apartment. It wasn't much, just a simple 2-bedroom unit with modern furniture and an atmosphere of forced normalcy. He hadn't yet filled the space with all the pieces of his life that made it feel like a home. She stopped herself, then added, "I just need to see her, please." Jack sighed, defeated. Something in her tone shifted. She wasn't here to fight, at least not yet. "I'll go get her," Jack said, though his mind raced. Why was Claire acting like this? Why now, after everything? As he left to find Lily, he couldn't help but wonder what had changed. Was this some kind of ploy to get him to feel guilty? Or was it something more sincere? When he returned with Lily, she froze at the sight of her mother standing in the living room. Jack watched Lily's face closely, noticing the way she hesitated, unsure whether to run to her or to stay behind her father. "Mom?" Lily asked softly, her voice trembling slightly. Claire immediately moved toward her, kneeling down to be eye level. "Sweetheart, I've missed you so much." Lily looked at her mother for a long moment, then at Jack. Jack's heart ached, seeing the confusion in her eyes. She didn't understand the conflict, she was just a child. But Jack could see the fear that was rooted deep inside her, hidden beneath a mask of childlike resilience. "Mommy, are you coming home?" Lily asked quietly, her words catching in her throat. Claire's expression faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Not right now, honey, but I'll always be your mommy." "Nothing's going to change that." Jack stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment pressing in on him. He couldn't keep letting these moments slip through his fingers. He needed to protect Lily, to shield her from the truth as long as possible. "Lily, why don't you go play in your room for a little while?" Jack said gently, putting a hand on her shoulder. He wasn't sure what he was trying to protect her from more, his ex-wife's presence, or the raw emotions that were bubbling up between them. Lily nodded, her small face still torn between her parents. "Okay, Daddy." As soon as Lily disappeared down the hallway, Jack closed the door to the room where she had gone, then turned back to Claire. "Why now?" Jack asked, his voice low but sharp with anger. "Why are you doing this?" Claire stood there, wringing her hands, her usual confident demeanor slipping for the first time in months. "Jack, I'm not trying to—" "Not trying to what?" Jack cut her off, his anger rising. "Are you trying to win her back? Trying to prove that I'm not fit to raise her?" He laughed bitterly. "Because that's what you're doing. Every step of the way, that's what you've been doing. You don't want her because you love her. You want her because you want to hurt me." Claire's face twisted in pain. And for a moment Jack felt a twinge of regret. But only for a moment. The anger bubbled up again, thick and suffocating. "I don't want to hurt you," Claire said, her voice quieter now, more vulnerable. I want what's best for Lily. That's all I've ever wanted." Jack snorted. "If you wanted what's best for her, you wouldn't have let her grow up like this. You wouldn't have let her feel torn between us. I've never wanted her to feel torn." Claire's voice cracked. "But I'm not perfect, Jack. You think I don't know how much I've messed up?" "I'm trying. I'm really trying." There was silence between them for a long moment. The words hung heavy in the air. Jack felt the weight of it all, his anger, his guilt, his frustration. What was the right thing to do? How could he continue fighting when everything felt so broken? "Lily deserves better than this," Jack whispered, almost to himself. Claire looked at him, her eyes filled with something that Jack couldn't quite place. Was it regret? Was it genuine sorrow? Or was it just another tactic? For the first time in years, Jack found himself unsure of the answers. Maybe Claire wasn't the woman he had once loved. But maybe, just maybe, she was trying to be better for their daughter. And maybe for Lily's sake, Jack had to let go of his own bitterness. Before he could say anything more, the doorbell rang. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Who could that be? Jack didn't know how to feel when he saw the unfamiliar man standing at his door. Tall, with a sharp, businesslike air, he looked every bit the lawyer, though not one Jack had ever met. The man held a briefcase in one hand, a stern look in his eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. Jack barely had time to react before the man spoke, his tone as cold as it was direct. "Mr. Bennett, my name is Daniel Lawson. I'm representing Veronica Roberts in the custody case regarding your daughter." The words hit Jack like a slap. He had known the legal battle was coming, but hearing it from someone who didn't mince words made it feel real. And real meant that this wasn't just a matter of who had the better lawyer. This was a battle for Lily's future. His future. Jack tried to mask his shock, but the air between them thickened. "So it's come to this, huh?" he muttered, stepping back from the door to let the man inside. Daniel Lawson stepped in with a brisk nod. He didn't look like someone who would waste time on small talk. His presence alone seemed to fill the apartment, pushing Jack's uncertainty into sharper focus. "I'm here to discuss your legal options," Lawson continued, his voice clinical, devoid of any empathy. "And I'm sure you're aware that your actions in taking Lily from her mother are not just unlawful, but could result in serious consequences." Jack's jaw clenched and his fists involuntarily tightened. "I'm protecting my daughter. I'm not sorry for that." Lawson raised an eyebrow as though Jack's defense were of little consequence. "Your daughter, Mr. Bennett, is being used as a pawn in a battle that has nothing to do with her best interests. Your ex-wife's legal team is preparing for a full assault. They will argue you're unfit, and your recent actions won't help your case." Jack was no stranger to hard truths, but this felt different. Everything that had been mounting, the tension with Claire, the sleepless nights, the emotional toll of the hearing, had led him here, and now the weight of his decision was beginning to crush him. "Are you here to tell me I'm going to lose?" Jack said, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and frustration. Lawson sat down across from Jack, his hands folded neatly on the table. "What I'm telling you is that this is going to get much harder. Veronica will fight with everything she has. And while I'm sure you believe you have Lily's best interests at heart, you need to remember that the courts will always side with what's normal. They don't care about emotions. They care about stability, routine, and the legal precedent." The words stung more than Jack was willing to admit. He'd been so focused on protecting Lily from the chaos he felt in her mother's house that he hadn't stopped to consider the long-term consequences. Claire and her new husband, Craig, had their own problems. But the way Jack had acted, taking Lily without notice, without consent, wasn't exactly a story that would win him favor in a courtroom. "I can't just stand by and watch her live like that," Jack said, his voice growing more urgent. "Not with everything that's been happening. I have to do something." "I understand your frustration," Lawson replied, his expression unchanging. "But you need to be smart about this. You need to build a case, gather evidence, show that Claire and her husband are unfit, or that their home environment is unstable." Jack paused, his mind racing. He had never thought about the legal side of things like this. He had acted out of instinct, out of love for Lily, but now he was faced with the reality of what that could mean. "Is there any chance of winning?" Jack asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Lawson leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "You'll need to prove a clear and present danger to your daughter's well-being in order to win full custody. Your history with Claire, your past relationship, all of that will be scrutinized. And if you think she's going to give up without a fight, you're wrong." Jack rubbed his forehead, His thoughts were a whirlwind. The guilt, the rage, the endless questions about whether he was doing the right thing, they all collided in that moment. It wasn't just a matter of love. It was a matter of strategy, of playing a game he wasn't sure he knew how to win. "I'll do whatever it takes," Jack said, finally meeting Lawson's eyes. "I can't let Lily go back to that life. Then I suggest you start building your case, Lawson replied, standing up to leave, and be prepared for the storm that's coming. As Jack watched him leave, the weight of what he had just committed to sank in deeper. This wasn't just about Lily. This was about his future, his past, and a battle that could shatter everything he'd worked for. He knew one thing for sure: he wouldn't let Lily suffer again, no matter the cost. The early morning light poured into Jack's apartment, casting long shadows across the living room. He sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in his hand, staring blankly at the legal documents strewn before him. His mind was elsewhere, on Lily, on the custody battle, and on Claire. After everything that had happened, he never thought he'd find himself in this position. But something about last night's visit from Claire had stayed with him. Her vulnerable admission that she wanted what was best for Lily had planted a seed of doubt in Jack's mind. It had been a rare moment of honesty from her, so rare that it made him wonder if there was a chance for them to find common ground, if only for Lily's sake. He wasn't sure if he believed her. How could he after everything? But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the flicker of something deeper, something that felt like a possibility. For the first time in months, Jack wondered if there was room for reconciliation. The sound of a knock on the door broke his thoughts. He stood up quickly, heart racing, unsure of who it could be. Could it be Claire again, or perhaps one of his lawyers? When he opened the door, he was surprised to find Claire standing there, this time without her usual guarded expression. She looked tired, but there was a softness in her eyes, something that Jack hadn't seen in a long time. "Can we talk?" Claire asked, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. Jack studied her for a moment, his mind racing. Should he let her in? Should he trust her again? Everything inside him screamed to protect Lily, to keep her away from the chaos that Claire brought into their lives. But the truth was, Jack knew he had to find a way to work with her. He had to for Lily. He stepped aside, wordlessly motioning for her to come in. She walked past him, her footsteps heavy with the weight of everything unsaid between them. "I don't have much time," Claire began, sitting down at the table. I don't know how to fix this. I'm lost, Jack. I know I've made mistakes, but I swear to you, I want to do better for Lily." Jack felt his chest tighten. Her words were so different from the accusations she'd hurled at him in the past. This wasn't the Claire he remembered, the cold, distant woman who had always kept him at arm's length. No, this was someone who seemed genuinely broken, someone who had finally acknowledged the wreckage of their past. "I don't know what to say to that, Claire," Jack said, his voice wavering slightly. "You haven't exactly made it easy to believe you." "I know," she whispered, "and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I need you to know that I'm trying, for Lily. I'm trying to get my life together. I don't want her to grow up in this mess. I want her to feel safe, Jack. And I know she doesn't feel safe with me right now." Jack sat down across from her, his heart still heavy. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened, too. The things I've done, the things I haven't done. But one thing I know for sure. I can't stand the thought of her living that life, Claire. Not anymore. You saw how she was last time, crying in the basement, cleaning cockroaches. I can't let that happen again." Claire's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at her hands. I know. I never wanted that for her, but Craig, he doesn't understand, he doesn't see it. And I've been too scared to stand up to him. I thought if I could just keep everything together, maybe things would get better. But they haven't." The vulnerability in her voice made Jack's heart ache. She was a mother too. She was just as trapped in her own way, trying to make sense of a life she never expected to have. Jack took a deep breath, steadying himself. "So what now? What do we do about Lily?" Claire looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of forgiveness. "I'm not asking you to trust me overnight. But I am asking for a chance to try. I'll work on myself, I'll go to therapy, I'll make the changes I need to make. But I need your help, Jack. We have to work together. I can't do this alone." Jack stared at her, his emotions tangled in a knot of uncertainty. It was hard to reconcile the woman sitting before him with the woman who had walked out on him all those years ago. He had spent so much time hating her, blaming her for everything that went wrong. But in this moment, he realized something. Maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild something, for Lily's sake. "I don't know if I can trust you," Jack said quietly, his voice raw with emotion. "But I can't keep doing this alone either. We have to find a way to co-parent. For Lily. She deserves more than what we've given her." Claire nodded, her lips trembling as she tried to hold back the tears. "I'll do whatever it takes, Jack. I promise." They sat in silence for a few moments, both of them processing the weight of what had just been said. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, filled with more arguments, more disappointments, and more hard choices. But at least now, they had a starting point. They had agreed on one thing. They would do their best for Lily. As Claire left, Jack stood in the doorway, watching her walk down the hallway. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. Maybe they could find a way to move forward, even if it meant facing the past. It had been a few weeks since the uneasy conversation with Claire, and Jack found himself in a strange, almost surreal rhythm. His days were filled with work, court dates, and long, restless nights spent worrying about what would happen to Lily. But amidst the chaos, there were these small, fleeting moments with her. Moments that reminded him of why he was fighting so hard. Lily had settled into Jack's apartment better than he'd expected. She was still nervous, still unsure about everything that had happened, but she was adjusting. Every morning, Jack would wake up to find her sitting on the couch with a blanket wrapped tightly around her eyes tired but hopeful. "Good morning, sweetie," Jack would say, leaning down to kiss the top of her head. "Morning, Daddy," she would reply, her voice still soft and uncertain. But there was a tiny spark in her eyes, something that told Jack she was starting to feel at home again. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. They had their breakfast together, a quiet routine that Jack had never truly had with her before. Back when they were still living in the same house, he had been consumed by his work, always too tired to notice how distant they had become. He had been a good provider, but he hadn't been a good father. Now he was trying to make up for it. It wasn't easy. Some days Lily would retreat into herself, her mind wandering back to memories of her old life, of her mother and stepfather, of the house where she had once felt safe, even if it hadn't been. But other days, she would sit beside Jack on the couch, holding her favorite stuffed bear, and simply talk. About school, about friends, about the things she missed out. And slowly but surely, Jack began to learn more about his daughter than he had ever known before. One Saturday morning, Jack decided to take her to the park. He had no grand plan, no intention of forcing her into some deep conversation. He just wanted to spend time with her, to let her know she was loved. They walked hand in hand to the playground, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jack let himself relax. He watched as Lily ran toward the swings, her laughter ringing in the air. It was such a simple thing, but to Jack, it felt like everything. She was happy, she was safe, and that was all that mattered. And that, as Jack pushed her gently on the swing, his mind wandered back to his own childhood. He had been just a little older than Lily when his own parents had gone through their messy divorce. He remembered how it felt, the fear and confusion, the feeling of being caught in the middle. It hadn't been easy. But he had survived, and now he was determined to make sure Lily didn't have to survive. She deserved to thrive. Lily's voice broke him from his thoughts. "Daddy, do you think Mommy is going to be mad at me for staying with you?" Jack's heart clenched at the question. He had been expecting it, but it still hurt. Lily was torn, and he knew it wasn't her fault. She loved both of them, and now she was forced to choose between two worlds that no longer fit together. He pushed the swing a little higher, just enough for her to feel the wind in her hair. "Sweetheart, your mom loves you very much, and she's trying. I know that. But right now you're with me, and I'm going to make sure you're safe and happy, okay?" Lily nodded, though Jack could see the doubt lingering in her eyes. She wasn't sure she believed him completely, and that hurt more than he could admit. But that was the reality of the situation. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. It would take time. Time he didn't have much of. The custody battle was looming larger than ever, and every day brought new challenges, new questions. But for now, all Jack could do was be there for Lily. She needed him more than she ever had before. And he would do whatever it took to prove he could be the father she needed. As they sat on the grass, Jack pulled her close, wrapping his arm around her. She rested her head on his shoulder, her small body trembling slightly, but this time, Jack didn't mind. She needed comfort, and he would give it to her without hesitation. "I'm always going to be here for you, Lily," Jack whispered. "No matter what." She squeezed his hand. "I know, Daddy." And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt like he was doing something right. But the storm was coming, and no matter how hard he tried to protect her, there was no escaping it. The legal battle, Claire's resistance, the emotional toll of trying to rebuild a broken family, all of it was waiting just around the corner. Jack sat at his desk, papers scattered around him in a chaotic mess. The soft glow of the desk lamp illuminated the exhaustion in his eyes. It had been another long day filled with meetings, phone calls with his lawyer, and the relentless weight of the custody battle that seemed to be consuming every waking hour. But today, it felt different. Today, the stakes were higher than ever. The court date was fast approaching. Every document Jack had signed, every conversation he'd had with his lawyer, every motion filed, everything had led to this moment. And in just a few days, the judge would make a decision that would determine whether or not Jack would retain full custody of Lily. His mind raced as he thought back to the meeting he had had with his lawyer earlier that day. The evidence they had against Claire was clear. But there were cracks in their case, too, things that could be used against him. His lawyer had reminded him of the long history of Jack's absence during Lily's childhood, his work taking precedence over his daughter's emotional needs. Jack couldn't help but feel like he was being punished for trying to build a future. He had always thought that providing the best for Lily meant working hard and giving her everything she could ever want. But now, sitting here with the weight of the legal system pressing down on him, he wasn't so sure anymore. Was that really what she needed? The sudden sound of the door opening pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up to see Lily standing in the doorway, her face illuminated by the light in the hall. She looked so small, so fragile in that moment, as if she were carrying some unseen burden. "Daddy?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack immediately pushed aside the papers on his desk, his heart aching at the sight of her. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Lily hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. Then, in a quiet voice that seemed so much older than her 7 years, she spoke. "I don't want to go back to Mommy's house. I want to stay with you." Jack's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't the first time she had expressed this fear, but hearing it from her in such a clear and direct way hit him like a punch to the gut. "I know, baby. I know," he said, his voice trembling as he reached out to pull her into his arms. "I'm doing everything I can to make sure you're safe, I promise you. I'm not going to let anything happen to you." But the words felt hollow. He knew the reality of the situation. The court was a battlefield, and no matter how much he wanted to protect her, he didn't have complete control over what would happen next. As they sat there, Lily curled up against him. Jack couldn't shake the feeling of impending loss. What if he didn't win? What if the judge sided with Claire, or worse, with her new husband, Craig? The thought of Lily being forced back into that house, of her being exposed to the neglect and the emotional abuse, was more than Jack could bear. But he also knew that if he kept pushing too hard, if he kept trying to hold on to Lily without letting her mother be a part of her life, there would be consequences. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about what was best for Lily, even if that meant learning to trust Claire again, even if that meant acknowledging the possibility that maybe, just maybe, Claire could change. "Daddy, are you scared?" Lily's voice broke through his thoughts. Jack looked down at her, his heart heavy. He didn't want her to see how deeply scared he truly was, but it was impossible to hide it now. He nodded slowly, trying to smile, though it felt forced. "I'm a little scared." "Sweetie," he admitted, But that's okay. Sometimes being scared is just part of making sure we do the right thing. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you stay safe and happy. You and I, we'll get through this together." Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide with innocence. "I don't want to go back there. I want to stay with you forever." Tears stung Jack's eyes, but he fought them back. "I'll do everything I can, I promise." Just as he spoke the words, a sharp knock at the door interrupted their quiet moment. Jack froze. Who could it be this time? His lawyer? Someone from the court? Lily clung to his side, her small hand gripping his sleeve. Jack stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. He opened the door cautiously, only to be met by the last person he expected to see. It was Claire. "Jack, we need to talk," she said, her voice tight with an emotion Jack couldn't read. Claire's presence filled the doorway, and for a long moment neither of them moved. The air between them was thick with history, with old wounds that had never fully healed. But this time, Claire's expression was different. She looked worried, more vulnerable than Jack had ever seen her. "Lily's scared, Jack," Claire said, her voice cracking as she glanced at their daughter standing behind Jack. "And I don't blame her. I don't know what's going to happen in court, but I'm scared too." Jack's breath caught in his throat. He had expected a fight, expected the usual defensiveness from Claire, but this was something else. This was vulnerability, and Jack didn't know what to do with it. Claire stepped forward, her eyes meeting his. "I don't want to lose her either." The weight of her words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Jack wondered if this was the beginning of something different, a new chapter where they could somehow work together for the sake of their daughter. But before he could respond, Lily's voice rang out, clear and fragile. "I don't want to go back there, Mommy. I want to stay with Daddy." The words struck like a dagger. Claire's face twisted with pain, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there, her eyes locked on her daughter, her hands trembling. Jack's heart broke for both of them. This was the hardest part of all, the realization that no matter what he did, someone would always get hurt. The courtroom was eerily quiet. Jack sat in his usual seat, his hands clasped tightly together, fingers digging into his palms as he stared straight ahead. His lawyer was beside him, whispering words of reassurance, but Jack's mind wasn't on the case. His thoughts kept drifting back to the conversation he had had with Claire just days ago. The days leading up to the hearing had been full of uncertainty, but this new development, the shift in Claire's stance, had caught him off guard. She wasn't the same person she had been when the divorce had first happened. Cold, defensive, distant. Something had changed in her. Whether it was genuine concern for their daughter or the pressure of the legal battle weighing on her, Jack wasn't sure. But as she had stood at the door, her face pale and her eyes filled with fear, he had felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could find a way to move forward, to co-parent in a way that would allow both of them to be present in Lily's life. But now in the courtroom, everything felt like it was slipping out of his grasp. The judge was going over the case details, flipping through pages, and Jack's thoughts started to spiral. Could Claire really change? Could they truly find a way to co-parent effectively for Lily? Or had this all been a facade, just a temporary shift to throw him off his guard? He looked over at Claire, who was seated across the room. She was sitting with her lawyer, her face still as stone. Her eyes met his briefly, but she quickly looked away, her jaw clenched tight. She hadn't even acknowledged his presence when they had entered the courtroom. It felt like a slap in the face after everything they had just discussed. And then there was Craig standing beside her, looking every bit the part of the man who would fight tooth and nail to keep Lily out of Jack's life. The judge's voice snapped Jack out of his thoughts. "Mr. Jenkins, are you prepared to make your case?" Jack stood, his knees shaking slightly. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His voice was steady, but his heart was racing as he turned to address the court. "Yes, Your Honor, we are prepared." He outlined everything, the evidence, his financial stability, his ability to provide a stable home for Lily. He spoke about how much he loved his daughter, about how he had come to realize that being there for her emotionally was just as important as providing for her physically. He spoke about the moments they had shared since Lily came to live with him, the quiet mornings, the nights spent reading stories, the bond they had begun to rebuild. He was ready to fight for her, to prove that he was the better choice for her future. When he finished, there was a tense silence in the room. Jack sat back down, his heart pounding. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a battle of hearts. And no matter how much he loved Lily, he couldn't control the outcome. Then it was Claire's turn. She stood slowly, her eyes fixed on the judge. Her voice was calm, but Jack could hear the tremor in her words. "Your Honor, I love my daughter more than anything in this world. I know I've made mistakes and I know that Jack is trying. But I am her mother. I have been there for her since the moment she was born. And I am asking you to give me the chance to prove that I can provide the stability and love she needs." Jack felt a rush of anger flood through him. Stability? Love? Where was that stability when Lily was crying in the basement, cleaning cockroaches? Where was the love when Claire had buried herself in her new life with Craig, ignoring the real needs of their daughter? But Jack stayed quiet, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He couldn't let his anger control him. He had to stay calm, for Lily, for his daughter. Then Claire's voice grew even softer, more vulnerable. "I know I've failed her, but I'm asking for the chance to make it right." Jack's heart sank. Was this a true plea for redemption, or was it just another act? He had no way of knowing, but the words she had spoken hung heavy in the air. For a moment he wondered if she could truly change, if she could be the mother Lily needed. When Claire finished, Jack looked over at Lily, who was sitting with the court-appointed guardian in the back of the room. She looked so small, so fragile. Jack's chest tightened with the overwhelming urge to protect her, to shield her from all the pain of the world. But he also realized something else, that he couldn't protect her from everything. He couldn't control what happened in that courtroom. He could only fight for her, with everything he had. And then, just as the judge was about to call for a recess, Claire turned to Jack, her expression unreadable. "Jack," she said, her voice so quiet that only he could hear it. "I'm willing to negotiate. If you're willing to work with me, I want to share custody. I want to be in Lily's life. I can do better. I will do better." The words hit Jack like a tidal wave. For a moment, he couldn't process what she was saying. She wanted joint custody? After everything that had happened? After the way she had ignored Lily's needs? After everything that had transpired between them? But then, as he looked at her, really looked at her, he saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A spark of sincerity, a quiet desperation. It was almost as if she were pleading with him, not just as Lily's mother, but as a woman who had finally realized how much she had lost. Jack took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He wasn't sure if he could trust her. He wasn't sure if he could take the risk, but for Lily's sake, he had to try. "I'll think about it," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. The judge called for a recess, and as the room began to empty, Jack found himself standing there, lost in thought. Could he really trust Claire again? Could they really find a way to share custody and build a future for Lily together? The next few days would be crucial. Everything was on the line. And in the back of his mind, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this sudden change, this unexpected shift in Claire, was just the beginning of a far more complicated journey. The days following the hearing were the hardest Jack had ever faced. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of Claire's plea flashed before him. Her voice soft, vulnerable, but still laced with a kind of guilt he couldn't shake off. It was as though she were trying to convince not just him, but herself, that she could be the mother Lily needed. Jack tried to focus on the things that mattered most. Lily. She had been his priority from the moment she came to live with him. Every day with her felt like a small victory, a fragile peace that he didn't want to disrupt. But Claire's unexpected change of heart gnawed at him. Could he really trust her? Could they truly find common ground? That night, as Jack sat at his kitchen table, papers scattered in front of him, he couldn't help but remember the early days of his marriage to Claire. There had been love then. Real, raw, and undeniable. But somewhere along the way, things had fractured. Their marriage had become a battlefield, and now their daughter was the only thing that truly connected them. He thought about what Claire had said about sharing custody. Was it genuine, or was it a last-ditch effort to salvage something that was already broken? He didn't know. And as much as he tried to quiet the questions in his mind, they only grew louder. Lily came into the kitchen holding her stuffed bear, her eyes wide and uncertain. Jack smiled softly at her, pushing the papers aside. "Hey, kiddo, how was your day?" he asked, his voice light. She climbed onto the chair next to him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I miss Mom," she said quietly, her voice tinged with sadness. Jack's heart clenched. He had never wanted to be the one to tear their family apart, but somehow, in trying to protect her, it felt like that was exactly what had happened. He reached over and pulled her close, rubbing her back gently. "I know you do, sweetie," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "But I'm here, and I'll always be here for you." She sniffled and nodded. But Jack could see the longing in her eyes. She wanted both of them, her mother and her father, and that was something he couldn't fix on his own. The following week, Jack found himself face to face with Claire again. It was unexpected. He hadn't anticipated it, but the invitation had come through his lawyer. She wanted to meet, not in court, not in a lawyer's office, just the two of them. No lawyers, no paperwork, just a conversation. He was reluctant at first, but the idea of speaking to her outside of the courtroom, outside of the tension, was too tempting to ignore. So he agreed. He arrived at the coffee shop where they'd met countless times before. The place where they had once shared dreams and promises. The setting was familiar, but everything felt different now. He could feel the weight of their past pressing down on him. Claire was already there when he arrived, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee in front of her. She looked up when he entered, and for a brief moment he saw a flicker of the woman he had once known, the woman who had stood beside him at the altar, who had been his partner in everything. But that woman was gone. In her place was a stranger, someone who had been hardened by life, by mistakes, by the years of separation and bitterness. She motioned for him to sit, and Jack did so without a word. They sat there in silence for a moment, neither of them knowing where to begin. Finally, Claire spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said, about sharing custody. I don't expect you to trust me right away. I know I don't deserve that. But I need you to know that I'm willing to try. For Lily." Jack didn't say anything at first. He just studied her face, trying to read the sincerity in her words. Was this real? Or was it another attempt to manipulate him, to make him doubt himself? "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." "Claire," Jack said quietly, his voice raw, "you've hurt me. You've hurt Lily, and I don't know if I can just forget that." Claire's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in a long while, Jack saw the woman who had once been his partner, his equal. She wasn't just a mother to his daughter anymore, she was a person, flawed and broken in her own way. "I know," she whispered. "I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to give me a chance, to show you that I can be better, that I can be the mother Lily deserves." Jack felt a pang of guilt hit him, but he didn't let it show. It wasn't about guilt, it was about his daughter. Lily deserved better than this. She deserved both of her parents, not this constant tug-of-war. "I don't know what that looks like," Jack said, his voice barely audible. "But I'm willing to try too. For her. But I need to know that you're committed, that this isn't just some momentary change." Claire nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "I am. I'm committed to making this work. I'm not asking for anything more than a chance." The conversation lingered in the air, thick with uncertainty. Jack didn't have all the answers. He wasn't sure if he could fully trust her again, but he could see the change in her. Even if it was small, and maybe, just maybe, that was a start. As he stood to leave, Jack's mind was filled with a whirlwind of emotions. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. He wasn't the same man he had been when this all started. And maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. There was a... For Lily, for all of them. The days that followed Jack's meeting with Claire felt like a delicate balance, one that could tip at any moment. Jack didn't expect miracles, but something had shifted between them. It wasn't a sudden transformation, nor was it the kind of change that could mend years of hurt. But it was a start, and Jack was holding on to that fragile hope like a lifeline. Lily had been quieter than usual, her small voice barely heard in the midst of the tension that still hung in the air. Jack noticed it more than he let on, but he was doing his best to remain calm, to shield her from the emotional turmoil he felt. He had always been the protector, and now more than ever that role seemed like an overwhelming burden. But the morning after his conversation with Claire, something happened. Lily came into the kitchen with her eyes wide and her teddy bear clutched tightly in her hands. She had been quiet for days. Her little heart weighed down by the uncertainty of it all. But now she looked up at him with a glimmer of something. Maybe hope, maybe confusion. "Dad," she said, her voice small but steady. "I miss Mom, but I don't want things to be scary anymore." Jack paused, his heart breaking for her. This wasn't about him or Claire anymore. It was about Lily. She didn't need to be dragged through this mess. She needed stability, love, and safety. Jack could give her that, and he had to believe Claire could too, if given the chance. "I know, sweetie," Jack said, kneeling down to her level, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "I know it's been really hard. But we're going to figure it out, I promise. You don't have to be scared anymore." Lily nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that this new arrangement, this fragile truce between her parents, would make everything better. Later that day, Jack received a call from Claire. It wasn't unexpected. She had promised to keep in touch, to follow through on her commitment. He had half expected the conversation to be awkward, strained, maybe even filled with old resentments. But it wasn't. Claire sounded different, and for the first time in months, Jack could hear sincerity in her voice. "I've been thinking about what you said, Jack," Claire began, her voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of vulnerability. "I know it's not going to be easy. I know I've made mistakes, but I want to start over. I want to do better for Lily, for all of us." Jack wasn't sure how to respond at first. Could he trust her? Should he trust her? The questions swirled in his mind, but he took a deep breath before speaking. "We'll take it slow," he said, trying to keep his emotions in check. "But I'm willing to give you a chance. For Lily's sake." A long silence followed, and for a moment, Jack wasn't sure if she would say anything else. But when Claire finally spoke again, her words were soft, almost tentative. "Thank you, Jack. I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'm going to earn it. I promise you." There was something in her tone that made Jack believe her. Maybe it was the way her voice cracked slightly, or maybe it was just the weight of everything they had both endured. But for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe that things could change, that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild something for Lily. That evening, Jack sat on the couch, Lily curled up beside him, her small hand tucked into his. They were watching a movie. Something lighthearted, something to take their minds off the constant undercurrent of tension. It was the kind of normalcy they had longed for, the kind of peace Jack had fought for every day since the divorce. And for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel a little bit of hope. Lily's head rested on his shoulder as the credits rolled, and for a moment Jack forgot about everything else. He forgot about the legal battles, the fractured relationship with Claire, the fear that still lingered in the back of his mind. All that mattered in that moment was the feeling of Lily beside him. He was doing everything he could to protect her, and for now, that was enough. The next day, Jack took Lily to the park, something they hadn't done in weeks. The sun was shining, and the cool breeze felt like a balm for his soul. They sat on the swings, Jack pushing her gently as she laughed, the sound of her joy lifting something heavy inside him. But as the day wore on, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. He wasn't sure what it was, but there was a restlessness that he couldn't ignore. Perhaps it was the calm before the storm. Perhaps it was the dawning realization that they weren't out of the woods yet. Later that evening, as they returned home, Jack's phone buzzed. It was a message from Claire. "I've been thinking, maybe we can all meet soon. A family dinner, you, me, and Lily. It's time for us to try again. What do you think?" The words hit Jack like a punch to the gut. A family dinner. The idea of sitting down with Claire again, of trying to create something resembling the family they once were, felt like both a challenge and a blessing. Jack didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sat in the silence, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Was this truly the right step forward? Could they find a way to coexist? To give Lily the stability she so desperately needed? As the days passed, Jack struggled with his emotions, torn between the possibility of rebuilding something with Claire and the fear of repeating the past. But deep down, he knew that this was their chance. This was their moment to try again, to heal old wounds and find a way forward. For Lily, for themselves, and maybe for the broken pieces of their family. But would it be enough? As the weeks passed, Jack found himself immersed in a quiet but intense battle to rebuild the life he and Lily deserved. It was strange to feel this sense of hope again after everything they had gone through. But it was there, flickering in the corners of his heart. Claire had kept her word, attending the family therapy sessions, making the effort to show up for Lily, and Jack too, in ways he hadn't expected. But the process was slow, measured, almost painfully deliberate. Jack was used to things moving fast, especially in his career. He was a man of action, not one to dwell too much on the past. But this was different. Rebuilding a family wasn't a quick fix. It wasn't a project you could manage from the outside, like everything else in his life. No, this took time, patience, and a willingness to confront everything they had been running from. Claire had changed. Jack could see that. There was a softness in her now, a weariness in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. She wasn't the woman he had married, but that didn't mean she couldn't be someone he could trust, someone who could be part of Lily's life again if they all worked hard enough. It wasn't easy. Some days felt like progress. Others felt like they were taking 2 steps backward. But it was the best they could do for Lily, for the future they could still shape. Jack knew it wasn't about perfection. It was about making a choice every day to keep going, to do better, to love more deeply. One evening, Jack and Lily were sitting at the dinner table sharing a quiet meal. It was a rare moment of peace in their home, the kind they'd been craving for so long. Lily had finished eating, and as Jack cleared the plates, she did something that made his heart skip a beat. She reached out, placing her tiny hand on his arm. "Dad, I'm glad we're all together," she said softly. Jack stopped mid-motion, his hands frozen in place. It was as if the world had paused, and all that mattered was Lily's simple, sincere words. He glanced down at her, her blue eyes meeting his with the same intensity that had kept him fighting all this time. "I am too, sweetheart," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "We're going to be okay, you know." Lily nodded, her face glowing with the kind of peace Jack hadn't seen in a long while. It was a bittersweet moment, one he wanted to freeze in time. If only it could always be this easy, this simple. But deep down, Jack knew this was just the beginning. They had a long way to go, and it wasn't always going to feel like this, like they had found a way to put everything back together. There would be struggles, more tears, more arguments. They weren't in the clear yet. The next morning, Jack got a call from Claire. His gut tightened as he answered, the thought of it being another difficult conversation still looming in his mind. But this time her voice was calm, steady. There was no tension, no avoidance. "I was thinking," she said, "maybe we can plan something for Lily's birthday next month, just the 3 of us." The words hit Jack like a wave. A birthday party. It was a significant step, more than just a gesture. It was an invitation to fully embrace the idea of a family again, to step into a future where they could all coexist without the ghosts of their past hanging over them. Jack swallowed hard, his emotions threatening to bubble over. This was huge. This wasn't just about a birthday. It was about showing Lily and themselves that they could be a family again, no matter how broken they'd been. "I think that sounds like a great idea," he said, his voice steady despite the swirl of feelings in his chest. "Let's make it special for her." Later that afternoon, Jack found himself at the store, looking for birthday decorations for Lily. The aisles were filled with bright colors, balloons, and all sorts of party supplies. It was a moment he never thought he'd get to experience again, not after the mess that had been their lives in the past year. As he picked out a few items, he couldn't help but think about how much they had all changed. The Jack who had been too focused on his career, too distant from his emotions, was no longer the same person. The man standing in this store, picking out streamers and party hats, was a father who had fought tooth and nail to make things right for his daughter. It wasn't just about the party. It was about the fact that Lily was going to have a celebration with both of her parents there, in the same room, smiling at her. That thought alone made his heart swell with pride. He had made it happen. They had made it happen. The day of Lily's birthday arrived, and Jack couldn't remember the last time he had felt this nervous. He wanted everything to go perfectly, but he knew that perfection was a myth. Still, he had put in the effort. He had done his best to create a day that Lily would remember for the rest of her life. Claire showed up early, just like she had promised, her arms filled with gifts for Lily. They exchanged a brief, tentative smile when they saw each other, acknowledging the work they were both putting in. It wasn't easy, but they were trying, and that was all that mattered. Lily's eyes lit up when she saw the decorations, the balloons, the cake, the presents. It was everything she had dreamed of. She ran up to Jack and hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Daddy. This is the best day ever." Jack's heart melted as he hugged her back. It was all worth it, every single moment of doubt, every sleepless night. This was why he had fought so hard, to see his daughter's face light up with happiness. As they all sat down to enjoy the cake, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him. The family he had longed for was starting to come together, piece by piece. But as they laughed and sang happy birthday, Jack knew that this moment, as perfect as it felt, was still fragile. The journey was far from over, and the road ahead was filled with unknowns. But for now, in this small, fleeting moment, everything felt right. Jack awoke the next morning to the sound of rain tapping softly against the window. It was a sound he found strangely comforting, soothing in its consistency. Yet, as he glanced over at Lily's bed, empty except for her stuffed animals, he was reminded that the peace they had built was still fragile. Lily had spent the night at Claire's place. Her request, a sign that she was starting to heal, starting to feel safe enough to be away from Jack's protective grasp for short periods of time. It was a step forward, but it also filled Jack with unease. Every moment, every gesture seemed like a delicate balance, and he wasn't sure how long it would take for things to truly stabilize. It had been weeks since the birthday party, and while there had been progress, it hadn't been without its setbacks. There were the awkward silences during family dinners, the strained moments of interaction between Jack and Claire. Despite their best efforts to co-parent, the old wounds between them, deep unresolved, were never too far from the surface. Claire was still figuring out her place in their newly formed family dynamic. Though she had shown genuine effort to connect with Lily, there was a hesitation in her eyes when Jack was around. Perhaps she wasn't entirely sure of where she stood with him anymore, or maybe it was just the weight of all their history. Jack had hoped their relationship would improve, but he quickly realized that healing wouldn't happen overnight. It wasn't just about repairing their bond, it was about learning to trust each other again. Jack, in particular, had always been a man of control. He'd prided himself on his ability to manage situations, to control the narrative of his life. But with Lily's well-being hanging in the balance, he was forced to confront the reality that he couldn't control everything. It was during one of their weekly therapy sessions that Jack felt the first tremors of what was to come. He had come to expect moments of tension, but today felt different. Claire, sitting beside him, seemed quieter than usual. When the therapist asked how they were doing, she hesitated before speaking. We're doing better, I think, but it's still hard to figure out how to communicate. Jack and we've had our issues and I know it's going to take more time. Jack stiffened. He didn't like talking about his past mistakes. Not in front of a therapist, certainly not in front of Claire, but he knew this was part of the process. He had to confront it, just as he had confronted the pain of their divorce. The isolation he had felt when Lily was taken from him. "I'm trying," he said, his voice low but steady. "I know things haven't been easy, but I'm here. I'm doing what I can." The therapist, a kind woman in her mid-50s, gave him an encouraging smile. "It's good to hear that, Jack, but what does trying look like for you? What does it mean for both of you to feel like you're rebuilding together, not just separately?" Jack opened his mouth to respond, but stopped short. He had never really thought about it that way. Rebuilding together. What did that even mean? Was it simply going through the motions, or was it something deeper? Something that required both of them to let go of their anger, their fears. Claire glanced at him, her gaze softening for a moment. "I think we're learning. We're learning what it means to be a family again. But it's going to take more than just saying it. We have to show it." The words hung in the air, and Jack felt the weight of them, the truth he hadn't fully grasped before. They weren't just rebuilding their relationship for Lily, they were rebuilding it for themselves too. They couldn't keep living in the shadows of their past mistakes. That night, after therapy, Jack went home to an empty apartment. Lily had stayed over at Claire's again, something she had been doing more often as she grew more comfortable with her new routine. Jack found himself pacing the living room, a familiar restlessness clawing at him. He tried to relax, but every creak of the floorboard, every gust of wind against the windows, reminded him of how much was still uncertain. As much as he tried to keep his mind occupied with work, it was impossible to ignore the nagging thought in the back of his mind. What if things didn't work out? What if Claire and Lily's relationship grew stronger, and his own connection with Lily began to fade? The very idea filled him with dread. The thought of losing Lily, of her becoming closer to Claire, of him becoming just another visitor in her life, was a fear he couldn't escape. But as the night wore on, Jack's mind began to slow, and his thoughts drifted back to the conversation earlier that day. Rebuilding together. He wasn't just fighting for Lily. He was fighting for the future he wanted, not just as a father, but as a man who had a second chance, a chance to rebuild something he had lost. Just as he began to calm himself, a sudden knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Startled, he stood up and walked to the door. Who could it be at this hour? When he opened it, his heart skipped a beat. Claire stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. The rain had stopped by the time Jack opened the door, but the heaviness in the air seemed to linger. Claire stood there, her expression a mixture of frustration and fear. For a moment, neither of them spoke, as if the words they had been holding back were too dangerous to release. Jack stepped aside, silently inviting her in. There was no time for pleasantries now. They were beyond that. As she walked into the dimly lit apartment, Jack felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. This wasn't going to be an easy conversation. Claire closed the door behind her, and they both stood there in silence for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. "Jack, I don't know what to do anymore." Her voice trembled, barely above a whisper. Jack's heart ached at the rawness of her tone. He'd always known that Claire struggled, but hearing her speak with such vulnerability made him realize how much was at stake. Not just for him and Lily, but for her as well. They had spent so many years building walls between them, keeping their emotions buried under layers of anger and regret. But now, in the quiet of this room, the walls had begun to crack. "I've tried," Claire continued, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. "I've tried to be there for Lily, to help her, to be a mother to her. But sometimes I wonder if it's enough. If I'm enough." Jack's chest tightened. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the same kind of exhaustion that had consumed him in the weeks since he took Lily in. This wasn't just about their past, or about custody, or about who had the right to be the best parent. This was about the fear of failing the person you loved most, the person you swore to protect. "You are enough, Claire," Jack said quietly, stepping closer to her. "You are more than enough, but I think we both need to admit something." Claire turned to face him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of what he meant. Jack took a deep breath before speaking again. "We're both scared. We're scared of what this is, of what it means to try and make this family work again. We're scared of not being good enough for Lily, of not being good enough for each other. But the truth is, we don't have all the answers. We don't need to have all the answers. We just need to be honest with each other." The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy, but necessary. Claire's expression softened, the tension in her shoulders easing just a fraction. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she whispered, more to herself than to Jack. "I'm tired of pretending that everything's okay when it's not. I love Lily, but I don't want to keep fighting you, Jack. I don't want to keep fighting for control. I just want what's best for her." Jack reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, a gesture that seemed to surprise both of them. He hadn't realized how much he needed this moment of connection, how much he needed to hear her say that she was still invested in their daughter, in their family, in a future together. "I don't want to fight either," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm scared too. I'm scared that if we don't do this together, if we don't figure out how to put our differences aside, we're going to lose Lily. I don't know what to do, but I know I can't do it alone." The silence that followed felt different from the tense silences they had shared in the past. It was a quiet that felt like possibility, like the beginning of something new. Slowly, Claire nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. "Together. But it's going to take time, and it's going to be messy, and we might stumble. But if you're willing to try, then so am I." Jack felt a weight lift from his chest. They were finally speaking the same language, the language of hope, of rebuilding, of healing. It wasn't perfect and it wouldn't be easy, but it was a start. "I'm willing to try," he said, his voice steady now, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. "For Lily. For us." But as Jack reached for the door to let Claire leave, a sudden knock interrupted them. A familiar voice called from the other side. "Jack?" Both Jack and Claire froze. The voice, distant yet urgent, sent a shock of panic through Jack's chest. It was a voice he hadn't expected to hear again. His lawyer. A chill ran down his spine as he glanced at Claire, whose face had gone pale. They both knew that what was about to come could change everything. The tension had shifted once again. What was supposed to be a moment of resolution between Jack and Claire now hung precariously in the balance, as the past refused to stay buried. The knock on the door echoed like a warning bell, deep and unsettling. Jack glanced at Claire, his mind racing. His lawyer had no business coming to his home unannounced, especially not after everything they had been through. But there was no mistaking the urgency in the voice. "I'll get it," Jack said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. As he opened the door, his lawyer, Richard Stone, stood on the other side, a solemn expression on his face. The moment Jack saw him, he knew that whatever was coming was going to be monumental. "Jack," Richard began, his voice low, "we need to talk." Claire stepped forward, her brow furrowing as she noticed the lawyer standing in their doorway. Jack nodded at her to stay back, knowing that whatever was about to unfold was something they couldn't ignore. "Richard, what is it?" Jack asked, trying to keep his voice neutral, though anxiety coiled in his stomach. Richard looked from Jack to Claire, then back to Jack. "It's about the custody case. The judge has made a ruling." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had known the day would come, the day when everything they had been fighting for would come to a head, but he hadn't expected it to feel so final. "A ruling," Claire echoed, her voice shaking slightly. Is it good news?" Richard hesitated for a moment. "It depends on your perspective. The judge has awarded temporary custody to Claire. For the next 3 months, Lily will be living with her full time. Jack, you're still in the picture. But you'll only have visitation rights for now." Jack felt the floor drop from beneath him. The words hit him like a blow to the gut. The fear he had carried for weeks, months even, had finally materialized. He had tried everything to hold on to Lily, to prove he was capable of being her father, of providing for her the way she deserved. And yet here he was, standing on the precipice of losing her again. Claire's face paled. What does this mean? 3 months? That's not long enough. We've only just started to rebuild things between us. I know, Richard said, his tone softer now, though the gravity of the situation was still apparent. But this isn't the final decision. It's just a temporary ruling. You both need to keep fighting. But for now, Claire, you're the one who will be taking care of Lily full-time. Jack's mind raced, and for a moment he couldn't find the words. This wasn't how he had imagined it ending, not like this. He had hoped, prayed, that the court would recognize how much he had changed, how much he had fought for Lily, for their family. But this ruling felt like a slap in the face, a stark reminder of just how fragile everything was. Claire, sensing his devastation, took a step closer to him. She placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle but firm. Jack, we need to remember this isn't over. We can keep fighting, we have time, we just have to show them we can do this together. Jack looked at her, his eyes brimming with emotion. I don't want to lose her, Claire. I can't lose her again. You won't, Claire said. Her voice filled with conviction. We're in this together, remember? We're doing this for her, for us. It was the first time in a long time that Jack felt a glimmer of hope. He realized then that, while the legal battle wasn't over, this moment, this crisis, wasn't the end. It was just another chapter, another challenge that they would have to face together. With a deep breath, Jack nodded. You're right, we fight for her, we don't give up. Richard gave them both a final look, as if assessing the strength of their resolve. I'll keep you updated. We'll have another hearing soon, but for now, we take this one step at a time. Remember, there's always a way forward. As Richard left, Jack and Claire stood in the doorway, their emotions swirling around them. They had come so far, only to be faced with another obstacle. But now, finally, they were both on the same side. Jack, Claire said softly, we'll figure this out, we have to. For Lily. And in that moment, Jack knew she was right. They had come so far, fought so hard, and no ruling, no matter how difficult, could take away the love they had for their daughter. They had a second chance at this, at being a family, and they wouldn't let anything tear that apart. Lily was the center of their world. She was their future. And as they closed the door behind them, stepping into the unknown future, Jack felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. A small, fragile hope, but a hope nonetheless. The story comes to a powerful close, marking the beginning of a new chapter for Jack, Claire, and Lily. They still face challenges, but they face them together. The healing has only just begun, but with love, trust, and determination, they can rebuild their broken family. The future, while uncertain, now holds a promise,